teaching middle school, and I also have been part of SPU's Digital Education Leadership Program, so I just wanted to plug that as well. So you would find it silly if I said that I was planning a lesson where my priority was to use Post-it notes. We never said to our colleague, oh, can you help me collaborate on a lesson where we get to use highlighters? Because these are tools, resources, not objectives for learning. Yet, so often when we learn new tech, we go back to our classrooms and our priority is to implement this new technology, thinking that if this is our priority, we can prepare our students for the future. But we know that this isn't necessarily sustainable, especially with the barrage of new tech that's always going our way. So there isn't just one direction to get there. I asked my 23-year-old sister if that was a good joke. She said yes. There might be another way. What if we think about the types of adults that we want our students to become? We want them to be innovative critical thinkers. We want them to be tenacious problem solvers, socially conscious entrepreneurs, community organizers, bipartisan politicians, maybe. And so, if we think about this, this is what brought my colleague and I to decide we wanted to implement this idea of Genius Hour. Genius Hour supposedly was a premise that has had success at companies like 3M and Google, in which employees are given 20% of their workday to work on passion projects. And so when students are given this opportunity, they end up being involved in inquiry-based learning. Their learning is student-driven. And what I'm hoping to share today is that maybe the tech integration can come in a more organic and sustainable way, as opposed to being the first priority. We don't have to be an expert on every tech tool, even on our content in our classrooms, in order for students to learn. Perhaps we can allow them to drive the learning, and we can serve as more of a facilitator. So we started with our social studies curriculum, which is the Middle Ages, and we go at such a frenetic pace that we often don't have time for our students to investigate the cool stuff. The knights, the castles, the warfare, the sanitation. So we said, why don't you draft some I wonder statements, and we'll teach you how to write essential questions, and we'll let your curiosity guide you in your learning. And then we posed the challenge of how are you going to innovate with what you learn? This is Claudia. Claudia, this looks like a simple research report. It's not. She was interested in medieval fashion, which narrowed to headwear, and she said, Mrs. Tremonte, I can't possibly know this unless I make some myself. So she found images of medieval patterns, blew them up to scale, asked her mom to teach her how to use a sewing machine, and created a bunch of different versions. I wish you could see the one on the end, because it's pretty elaborate. Because then she felt like she was an expert and she could teach her peers about such a specific topic. Sean used engineering principles to develop 3 different types of trebuchets. He wanted to know which one could fling a dead body the farthest in the time of war. Emily was interested in why all medieval music was religious, and so she set up interactive and collaborative listening stations for her peers to learn about modern music meanings. And then there was Jenny. She really wanted to understand medieval artwork. The one on the left is an original medieval piece. Hers is in the middle. She set out to painstakingly recreate this by hand and eye alone, learning about underpainting, perspective, line, shadow along the way. She said, this was really exhausting, Mrs. Tremonte, but I feel like I really understand this. And this was not a requirement. This was because she was curious. So our next iteration, halfway through the year, where we said, well, what if we take this premise and add it to real-world problems? Let's ask our students to innovate to solve some real-world local community issues. What problem are you going to address? And you need to know enough about it that your proposal is new. The things they came up with were far more fascinating than what we could have proposed to them. How does racial discrimination affect school funding? How do we provide adequate health care for the homeless? I mean, fascinating and tough issues that came from 12-year-olds. One group taught themselves editing software to create public service campaign commercials to teach their peers about pollution and salmon streams. Erin was really fascinated by the transgender bathroom bills, so she made collaborative online spaces and interactive games for her peers to interact with her about this topic. Then there was Mia and Shreya. They wanted to redesign homeless shelters to make them more efficient in Issaquah. So Mia asked her dad, can I use your 3D printer at work? They spent weekends doing trials to learn the scale, print speed, temperature, over and over, having lots of failures along the way, just because they were so determined to create this. not because it was required, but because they were curious. It was an astounding show of resilience and problem solving. Even an oldie but goodie, Understanding by Design, says that our students should wrestle with problems, issues, and questions, and that explanation should come from them, not from their ability to recall or recognize the explanation of others. You might say, really, so this premise is based on 20% of class time going to this idea. You might say, that's a little crazy. I think my colleague and I would say, we could have used more. So what's the takeaway? You might be thinking, this sounds kind of messy. It is. That's okay. Students are often confused or exhausted because they don't know how to blaze the perfect path to success. That's okay too. They learned that they have to take ownership over their own learning, and that as teachers we don't always have the answer, but it's okay because we can learn together. And I would say that having them problem solve, troubleshoot, maybe fail along the way, that's what can prepare our students for the future, not necessarily being an expert on one particular tech tool. Thanks so much.